Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? It is Monday. Monday, May 7th, 2018. It is week 68 of The Presidential Apprentice. I don't know whether anybody gets buried under the island or voted off the island or whether we're ever going to vote again. But whatever, we're in for another wild ride. I'm sure there's some voting going on tomorrow. We'll catch up on all of what is next when Greg Dworkin joins us after, once again, a wild weekend during which mostly the president had nothing to say and, of course, nothing to do. But naturally, he is too busy to be questioned by the special counsel. You got to get a couple of rounds of golf in and, of course, watch 4 hours of television, lounge around in bed all day. Everybody knows that's a joke. The president, once again, with nothing on his public schedule for this morning, I note, as well. And just a bunch of rage tweeting, I guess, and who knows how many packs of Cheetos, Twinkies, whatever it is he's munching on this morning. But the weekend was a productive one for people covering not only the president, but politics from all angles. Lots going on, of course, as always, to catch up on. And there's very little doubt, I think, about what were the top shockers for the weekend. We'll certainly be talking about the stories covered in, the New York. Well, everybody has something about it. There's the King of Debt story in the Washington Post, which I guess to make it complete in terms of long story short, the Washington Times sidling right on up to saying, okay, well, all the president's money, to the extent that he has any in his hands at all, and they are tiny hands, comes from Russia. And where does money in Russia come from? It comes from Russian mobsters. And that's the bottom line of it. The president's mobbed up, and all the cash he's got is dirty. We'll also be talking, well, let's see. The Washington Post also gave up, they wrote up a primer on what is money laundering and how do you use real estate to do it. We already know how that's done just from watching it be done by the president and his closest henchmen. But there's that. There's the story of Michael Cohen's own dirty money and how he's building a shadowy business empire, as they put it in the New York Times. It's a crime syndicate, not a business empire. And, of course, the revelation in The Guardian, first, that Donald Trump was hiring private investigators, ex-spies, to try and dig up dirt on those who had negotiated the Iran deal during the Obama administration, because something, angry political enemies, gotta have dirt on them, maybe send them to prison, destroy their lives, etc., rather than, say, I oppose the Iran deal and I want to dismantle it, which would have been, dangerous, but within the prerogatives of a presidency. But no, we have to entirely undermine the personal lives of everybody who might have served a previous administration with which I disagreed. But it'll be very interesting once we finally begin to learn, well, why precisely did you decide to go that route? But we're distracted from that end by a second revelation about that same story over in the New Yorker. Ronan Farrow finding out that, I know exactly who it was that was hired to dig up all that dirt on the Iran deal operatives. And funny story, it happens to dovetail with the other story that made me internationally famous very quickly just a few weeks ago. The same investigative outfit that Harvey Weinstein used to collect dirt on his accusers. And, I might as well also point out, as Dana Hooley did as well on Twitter over the weekend, and I didn't put the tweet aside, but it's getting weird out there, and the stories, well, every story seems to dovetail with another. As we watched the Guardian story move to the Ronan Farrow note on the expansive note on the Guardian story. And then Dana's observation that it's starting to look like some of the same operatives are moving in between 2 and 3 major countries that occupy a lot of our time and attention in the news, that there's a weird nexus between Russian mobsters and Russian mobsters living in the United States and Russian mobsters having ties to Israel as well. This is an Israeli firm that Weinstein hired and that Trump allegedly hired as well. I say allegedly. I don't know. Someone else is alleging it, so I'll just say he did it. And it's a weird nexus, and it happens a lot. And oddly, a lot of them own taxi medallions, which is also weird, too. People who, well, I mean, to be, I think, as blunt as possible about it, is a lot of Russian-born Jewish operatives, I guess, that move between, well, the old Soviet Union and moved to the United States. And there was a wave of that kind of emigration going on in the 70s and into the 80s, which is when a lot of these folks arrived. And they, many of them also made a stopover or moved back and forth in between or claimed dual citizenship in Israel as Jewish people, which is under Israeli law is their right, and there's a strange nexus and connection there. And of course, I hesitate to point it out only because it will only help Trump's Nazi supporters say, see, I told you, it was the Jews all along. Well, there's plenty of reason to believe that the problem is a little wider than that. And any number of Russian oligarch billionaires involved in this laundering and trilateral trade. Don't say trilateral to the conspiracy theorists, who are not, of course, Jewish, but it's going to become an issue. And how they'll, I mean, ordinarily you would say, well, how do you extricate yourself from that if you're a Nazi and supporting a regime that is itself supported by so many emigre Jews? What do you do with that situation? And the answer is, I'm going to beat you up. So, they don't really have to answer for the logic of any of it, and they never have. So that's not going to trouble them a great deal. It's only going to cause trouble for the rest of us. Anyway, lots of other things to catch up on, including, let's see, Don Blankenship, surging in West Virginia, as they say in the newspaper, despite racist advertisements that he's airing. Of course, most people know that it's because of racist advertisements. And we are, once again, slowly learning that murdering coal miners is what the coal miners wanted. And they can't wait to elevate him to the Senate, apparently. But the Trump family trying in vain, I'm sure, to weigh in and put a stop to this Roy Moore-esque nonsense in West Virginia. We'll see how well it works. Greg Dworkin is here to help us round all this up. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Hi.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Ronan Farrow piece and the Guardian piece, but I will point out that if you're Ukrainian,
yes,
you might wind up on Brighton Beach and be part of the Michael Cohen nexus of crime families.
Right.
And it's like, there's only a few jobs available to you. You could be a doctor, or you could be a intelligence former clandestine agent who happens to do skeevy stuff on the side, or you could be a mobster, right, or an accountant. I guess those are the four things you could do.
Yes, and all a side hustle for all of that is it's weird. You're a doctor or a mobster, and you have a taxi medallion. But
well, the funny thing is, Michael Cohen actually worked on the skeevier sides of all of those and brought them all together.
Right. And so,
ambulance chasing fake car hits, and then the accountants trying to make it so that nobody knew where the money came from, especially when you money laundered. And by the way, I don't know if there's any connection between the Black Cube, which is the name of the company, that tried to investigate ex-Obama officials from Israel, and whether or not Michael Cohen had any ties to them as well. But,
we don't know.
the thing is, well, it'd be irresponsible not to speculate. And
Right.
the point is that it seems like when you step back and look at the big picture, Trump is, in my mind at least, possibly guilty of money laundering and racketeering, and he's possibly guilty of collusion and conspiracy, and he's possibly guilty of obstruction of justice, trying to make sure nobody finds out about those things.
Yes.
But then this New Yorker story and Guardian story brings up the idea that, oh, by the way, he may have also done a bunch of other things that we don't even know about.
Yeah, maybe. But we know about a lot of them, too.
We do. The ones we know about are pretty bad.
Yeah.
And then there's the stuff that we don't know. So the old Don Rumsfeld thing, there's the known knowns and the known unknowns, and then there's the unknown unknowns. And we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah,
So meanwhile, we got this primary day tomorrow. I think this primary is in 4 states. But the 2 that I think are most interesting are West Virginia and Ohio.
Okay.
West Virginia for the Senate and Ohio for the House. And the West Virginia Senate one, I mean, what can you say? Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond did well despite their racist ads.
Yeah, despite them all.
Despite them all. It's pretty amazing. Don Blankenship has this ad where he's speaking to the camera, all right, and he has all the energy of a lump of dough, but he's looking into the camera, and he reads, Swamp Captain Mitch McConnell has created millions of jobs for China people. While doing so, Mitch has gotten rich. In fact, his China family has, because he's married to Elaine Chao, in fact, his China family has given him tens of millions of dollars. Mitch's swamp people are now running false negative ads against me. They're also childishly calling me despicable and mentally ill.
Childish.
The war to drain the swamp and create jobs for West Virginia people has begun. I will beat Joe Manchin and ditch Cocaine Mitch for the sake of the kids.
True. Yeah. Cocaine Mitch, I kind of like it. I never thought it, but okay. Cocaine Mitch. I'm not even certain I know where that comes from, but I don't think I care.
Some company that he has holdings in supposedly was involved in transporting cocaine. There's like 8 degrees of separation, but that doesn't matter. As Blankenship said this morning, I'm more Trumpian than Trump.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's going to get him on his good side.
Right. So let's see. People said, that's a really racist ad, and Blankenship said, we're confused on our staff as to how it can be racist when there's no mention of race. There's no race. Races are Negro, white, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian. There's no mention of that.
Oh, God.
I never used the race word.
One again. Yeah, okay. I know.
Races are Negro.
Right. Sure. And then, A, there's no other races. And B, yeah, okay.
Interesting, by the way, in that statement, Caucasian is capitalized, Negro is not.
Oh, well, sounds like an accident.
Well, it's the old Spanish word.
Which they don't
See, I'm just trying to show you how open-minded I am about all this.
Right. Well, okay. All right. You could spend a year on Blankenship. Yeah.
I'm just saying, right? So then Politico has this piece here, Blankenship surging on eve of West Virginia Senate primary.
Oh, no.
And he's running against 2 other Republicans who are basically ignoring him and fighting each other until like this last weekend.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden they started dropping ads against Blankenship, which is why everybody thinks he's surging. But the other part of it is Blankenship has a lot of money because allegedly murdering people in the coal mines can make you a lot of money.
Yes.
And so he's going to spend it all on ads, and the other 2 guys don't have any money. And so for the last couple of days, all people have seen is Blankenship. And so there's a lot of name recognition there.
I guess so.
If he wins the primary,
amazing that
he's
there isn't
expected to
already.
lose against Manchin, but this is, 2018, so who knows?
Right, who cares? I mean, he may decide to murder more minors and rise to higher fame.
Right.
There's not that many left in West Virginia. He might be able to kill them all before the race is over.
Right. On Thursday, interestingly enough, the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., sent out a tweet asking, quote, the people of West Virginia to make a wise decision and reject Blankenship. No more fumbles like Alabama. We need to win in November. And then Trump sent out something similar this morning to the great people of West Virginia. We have together a really great chance to keep making a big difference. Problem is, Don Blankenship, currently running for Senate, can't win. No way. Remember Alabama. Vote Representative Jenkins or Attorney General Morrissey. Remember Alabama?
Yeah.
You remember Alabama? I remember Alabama.
The state, sure.
That's where Trump endorsed the child molester.
Oh, that guy.
So I guess he doesn't want to go so far as to endorse the murderer. But the thing is, Trump tends to be on the losing side of all this stuff. So, it's really hard to know.
I mean, I was kind of glad to see, it didn't really change my mind, of course, about Donald Trump or Donald Trump Jr., but it was like, oh, okay, I'm glad they're saying that. I don't know how much they mean it. And, of course, very often this is a jinx. And then they end up endorsing
Well, yeah, I mean,
anyway, it's just
strange thing, right? I mean, strange until he loses, and then it's okay. I'm all in on Roy Moore because this guy's terrible. He's awful. He is the worst possible human being on the face of the earth. But if he's going to run against a Democrat, I'm with him.
Well, yeah, that's what
happened in Alabama. Remember Alabama?
Wait a minute. Is this the same one that you were asking if I remembered a minute ago?
Yeah, it's the
doing
same
pretty
state.
good, right? I remembered that.
This piece on May 6, 2018, so it's relatively fresh, also in Politico. Elaine Chao's interviews with father raise ethical flags. That's
interviews
her
with
father.
Oh, okay.
The transportation secretary appears with her father, founder of the family shipping business, in Chinese language interviews with the Department of Transportation emblem behind them. Do you see this as a conflict of interest?
Do I see it? I haven't seen it yet. You heard your description, though. That sounded like one, but I don't see it as one.
By my
that's your technical question.
if you click the link, you'll see it. But,
wow, not going to get me to do that.
The point is that, remember, Elaine Chao is supposed to be one of the low-profile, not that corrupt cabinet members.
Right, that's true. Thank you, Don Blankenship.
Exactly right. So now that people are actually taking a look at what she does, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, that would not be a terrible outcome. I mean, in terms of taking down, let's say, Cocaine Mitch as well. Oh, did you happen to see Sam Stein's tweet on the subject? Not that long ago. He made an interesting comment. I should have grabbed it. But he was just basically saying, lots and lots of coverage in, of course, the political press about because Dems in disarray. Lots of coverage of, Pelosi is a political liability for Dems in the midterms.
As opposed to Mitch McConnell?
Right. Yeah. And he was saying, very little discussion of the fact that there's a surging candidate for Senate who is allegedly winning on the back of running against Cocaine Mitch, and no discussion at the national level among political pundits. Oh, my goodness, Mitch McConnell's such a huge liability for Republicans.
It might be on Wednesday.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe we just have to wait to see if it – well, I mean, here we have to wait to see if it happens. With Pelosi, well, she's Pelosi. Go for it. Run the story. But good point, and I guess we're just new to it with the McConnell thing, and this is like the 19th time they've done this with Pelosi, so it's an easy story to do.
Right. So my list of cabinet-level people who have been touched by Donald Trump and still have their reputation relatively intact, I think is down to 2.
You mean? Okay.
I think it's down to 2. It's Jim Mattis at Defense and Scott Gottlieb over at FDA.
Okay.
Those are the only 2 I know that are doing like a semi-professional job and not having their reputations completely trashed by Trump, probably because he's not paying attention to what they're doing.
Yeah, that's likely the case.
Right. Let's finish up on the special elections and primaries for the moment.
All right.
Let's turn to Ohio, and of course we have this lovely box-splainer to explain it all.
Oh, good. What is Ohio?
Well, it's remember Alabama?
Yes.
Well, obviously you forgot Ohio.
Oh, all right.
Ohio is a light red state. It's not a swing state anymore. It tends to vote Republican. That's important to keep in mind.
Okay.
Ohio will break your heart if you're a Democrat and you need it to win. Ask John Kerry. But this piece is entitled, "The Next House Special Election, Republicans Are Terrified They Might Lose." And this is Melanie Lenigan versus Troy Balderson in the GOP primary, explained, because it's a box-splainer. This one's by Dylan
can't
Scott.
avoid it. Okay.
Okay. And I'm going to take you back to an Alexander Burns and Jonathan Martin story in the New York Times back in October of 2017. Signaling frustration, senior House Republican plans to quit early And the senior House Republican that quit early is Pat Tiberi of Ohio.
Okay.
Very close ties to party leadership. But the interesting thing about that
Is he senior
is
now?
that he was a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee. And if you're going to pick a committee in the House that actually means something, it's that one. No pun intended,
gotcha.
because it's like that's where the money is.
Yes. And the ways part is important
Yeah,
as well.
they have their ways, but they also have the means.
That's the
And
that's
so
the stuff they want.
Pat Tiberi was one of those officials who looked at the underlying situation and said, look, in a primary, see Don Blankenship,
Yes.
the only way to win is to be more Trump than Trump, and you've got to wrap your arms around him because the base loves Trump, and you can't run against Trump and expect to win a primary. But if you do that, and then you go to the general election, you're screwed, because the greater majority of people, Democrats, just loathe Trump, and independents are kind of tired of him. So it gets very difficult to win your primary, but then also position yourself to win the general election. And many Republicans in Congress said, I can't do this, and I need to spend more time with my family. That's different than the ones like Blake Farenthold, who found that they needed to spend more time with their family because of ethical issues. Mm-hmm. Tiberi looks like he actually just got frustrated with the politics. Charlie Dent, style, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
So Tiberi steps down, and that's what opens up this Ohio 12 situation. That's the background. But it was not one of those he's resigning in disgrace. He was resigning in frustration. So Tiberi announces that he's going to step down. And now we got two people running. A very conservative insurgent, Melanie Lenigan.
Okay.
And then we have State Senator Troy Balderson, who actually Tiberi endorsed and put a lot of money behind. So he's the establishment candidate.
Oh.
And who's going to win? Well, Dylan Scott says, I asked an Ohio Republican with ties to the state GOP establishment to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how worried the GOP should be about this seat. This is not Pennsylvania 18, which in the past had gone Democrat, and there was sort of some history, even though it's a Trump district, there was some history of voting Democratic. This is a solid Republican seat, not as Trumpian as Pennsylvania 18 maybe. But how do people? It's an R+7 state. It's not R+20. It's one of those light red districts that in a wave election is now being rated as a toss-up.
Okay.
Which makes total sense. If you go by the Cook Political Report, their partisan voter index, and you figure that the generic ballot is something like Democrats +7, and this is an R+7, that makes it a toss-up. And that's the way they look at it in the most simple terms. So Republicans in the state say that it was already shaky, and when Dylan Scott asked an Ohio Republican with ties to the state to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how worried the GOP should be, here's the answer. Depends upon who we nominate. Right? It's a 10 if it's the wrong candidate in terms of worry.
Yeah.
And it's a 7 if it's one of the good ones.
Oh, that's still a lot of worry.
Yeah, either way, the Democrats are coming, and this is a seat they can flip.
All right. Well,
so that's another one to watch tomorrow. Ohio 12, and Lenigan versus the other guy who
whatever.
Balderson,
that stupid establishment bum. Yeah.
Who is the candidate in the box? You wouldn't know him and couldn't pick him out from a police lineup.
Yeah.
Which is where they may all wind up.
Oh, yeah. Well, then we'll get a chance to try to pick them out anyway. Yeah,
right. And the other thing that they make a point of, Dylan Scott does, it says that this is, although it's Republican, it's also a well-educated and suburban constituency, the kind that might be blanching a Trump and the sort of voters who would be crucial to Democratic dreams of retaking the House. And so the special election is on August 7th, but the primary for the Republicans is tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I can't vote in that, but it'll be interesting to watch. The whole thing has actually, from start to finish, has been kind of interesting. When you mentioned Pat Tiberi being a senior Republican, this is like, well, I don't know, you're not a golf fan, but if people who watch golf on TV for a number of years and you get around to finding at some certain age, let's say, that the golfers you've been used to following who are still on the tour, but they're like now old
tour,
guys,
right?
yeah, or they're about to get on the senior tour, and you don't know any of the young guys. Well, but eventually the young guys that rise to now be on the verge of joining the senior tour, and you're like, what? That guy is a senior already? Pat Tiberi was elected in his first came to Congress in 2001. And I guess at some point froze him in my memory as kind of a backbencher. He's got almost 20 years under his belt in Congress when he left. He was just one of the new guys that nobody was paying any attention to. And all of a sudden, you get elected 9 times. And
you
boom,
should probably do a series, when you have a chance and pull them together. You could call it Aging Guns.
Yeah, I mean that's really what it is
anymore.
too, right? A lot of them used to be part of that Young Guns thing, and all the Young Guns are one by one. They're either getting bounced out of Congress or aging out or leaving in frustration
for one reason or another.
Yes. Okay. All right, we're almost up to our break here.
Right. So just keep in mind that Jim Jordan is backing Lenigan. That tells you what you need to know.
Okay. All right. That pretty much that does it. That's a weird.
Also, Club for Growth is backing her. So it may be that the arch conservative insurgent actually wins that one.
And then that makes it a 10 in terms of worry.
Yeah, just think of the tagline here. Lenigan says, a Christian conservative, a constitutional conservative, a Trump conservative.
Oh.
A real conservative.
R.I.P. Constitution. Oh,
right,
well.
Exactly.
It's nice while it lasted. All right. Well, we'll take a brief break here and get back to the roundup in 2 minutes or so. What a tale.
What a tale.
More to come. Okay, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support.
Armando really wants to do that.
We are back, as a matter of fact. Back on with Greg Dworkin here on the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Are we already moving on to the portion of the show where we do whatever Armando wants?
No,
okay.
Not quite there.
All right. Excellent.
In fact, I don't know if we're ever quite there, but I want to finish up with Ohio 12.
I'm trying it out. Yes.
This is another thing here. The Freedom Caucus is arguing that Republicans need to energize their base. Here's part of the reason why this is interesting.
Okay, go do it.
And this is a quote from Politico that Dylan Scott over at Vox was summarizing. Another national Republican strategist put the situation in Ohio even more bluntly. If she wins, the seat's probably gone.
Nice.
Okay? And Jim Jordan says, no, you got to vote for her because you got to turn out the grassroots if you're going to win a special. So she's the best one equipped to do that. And there's a certain correctness about what he's saying because it's really who votes, not what the polls show. There's only one poll that I see cited here, and it's very hard to poll special election primary voters. I mean, it's just tough to do. But listen to this one. And I'm going to do this in the old Monty Python style. Remember the silly party, the slightly silly party?
Okay.
Right. The one poll we have shows a free-for-all. Balderson, who's the silly candidate, at 17%. Lenigan, who's the total wackadoodle party, is at 11%. Veteran Air Force officer Tim Kaine, I guess that qualifies him as slightly silly, at 10%, and another slightly silly state senator Kevin Bacon at 10%. So it's, you have 3 people who are splitting the establishment vote, and Lenigan may sneak in there.
Yes, good job. I mean, what are you going to do? But that does happen from time to time. And,
right.
Yeah. I mean, and that, by the way, just to relate it to some other stories we've done, that's why party organizations typically will step in and try and push some people out so that this kind of thing doesn't.
That's a scandal if they do that.
Yes. But okay. I mean,
What happened to our voting rights? What happened to democracy? Well, that's fine, but you want to win?
no, I don't care.
We do. We're the party.
Oh,
We're
right,
going
yes.
to
Wait, no, I
suggest
do.
if you do these things, maybe we have a better
did I
chance
say?
of winning.
Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of L's in this. So Melanie is kind of hard to say. So she can't win. That's the answer.
So we'll see. The Democrats also have a couple of candidates, but they sound like they have some fairly viable ones. They have Danny O'Connor, who's the Franklin County recorder with the endorsement of former Governor Ted Strickland, and Tim Ryan of Ohio, and is raising the most money. And then there's Zach Scott, who's a former Franklin County sheriff with strong name recognition, and John Russell, a local farmer with ties to area progressive grassroots groups. So it looks like O'Connor's a favorite, but we'll see.
Okay. Kevin Bacon was really the other
you
guy's
know,
name?
really the issue is not which is the Democratic candidate, because all of them are solid. It's who are they going to run against? It's a Republican seat, and if the wackadoodle party person wins, then the seat may flip.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
and that
we've seen
just
that before.
leads us to our bigger picture here.
All right.
This is a power post, the 202 thing.
Oh.
Republicans whose jobs once seemed safe are struggling for a 2018 survival strategy. And by 202 and Power Post, I mean it's from the Washington Post. This is a Dave Weigel and Paul Kane piece. And they're talking about the fact that dozens of House Republicans who previously coasted to victory are for the first time facing credible and well-financed Democratic opponents and working furiously to find a strategy for survival. And think about that in terms of the context of the Ohio 12 stuff I just presented. That's the micro look, and this is the macro look. Okay. Many newly vulnerable Republicans represent suburban communities, and they happen to give an example here of Republican Representative Ted Budd. But I'm giving you the example of Ohio 12, and it's the very same thing. If you're a Republican in a suburban community, you got problems.
Yeah, and every single one of the people is, what? Who? Yeah, okay, I mean, they're there. They've been there for a while. Even the piece that you're pointing at illustrated with a photo of, who's this? Representative Robert Pittenger of North Carolina. What? Who? These guys have done nothing. This is what happens, I guess. You fill Congress with candidates in a box, and then the one guy with, who's on the PX90 thing says he's a wonk, and so everybody pays attention to what he does. Nobody knows who's in the Congress. They're all just anonymous blobs.
Right. Democrats had largely ignored the districts in this decade, their North Carolina districts. After Republicans redrew the state's congressional boundaries to their advantage, Budd's district, which stretches from Democratic-leaning Greensboro to the northern suburbs of Charlotte, backed Trump by 9 percentage points, and voters in Pittenger's district, which runs from Charlotte nearly to the state's coastline, supported the president by almost 12 points. Point is, both of those are vulnerable. So an R+7 district like Ohio 12 definitely in the mix, and those are the kinds of seats that Democrats are going to have to take if they want to retake the House.
Okay. Well, Ted Budd hasn't been there that long.
Yeah.
So it might be
Well,
possible.
at least his name isn't Ted Bundy, so that's good.
That's name
I
recognition.
want to turn briefly before I go, relatively short segment today. I want to talk about some of, remember I said that there's two decent picks that Trump had. You can argue Mattis and Gottlieb at FDA. Here are some that aren't so good. This one is from Jonathan Swan and Axios talking about inside Scott Pruitt's miserable bunker.
Oh.
Scott Pruitt, I mean, there were reports that he is hanging on by being paranoid, isolating himself from everybody,
But
certainly
that's how
the
he got
EPA's
into
career
this.
staff, but also senior political appointees. They have no idea where and how Pruitt spends his time. They look at Twitter to try to keep tabs on him.
Does he tweet? Or is it
Well,
is
people
other
tweet
people
about him.
Okay, that's it. That's
Right?
the
He
difference
doesn't share
between
his
him and
travel
Trump.
schedule. They don't know what he's doing. And
don't know.
the bottom
He doesn't
line
know
here
what
is Pruitt has grown paranoid and isolated, and they only trust a small handful of people at the agency. Senior White House staff darkly joke among themselves every time a fresh bad story comes out about Pruitt. Numerous senior EPA staff have already resigned or plan to quit.
Yeah. No, I think they all are hoping to not be indicted if they're not still there.
Right. Now, the place runs without him. And so they basically do whatever they do with or without Pruitt.
Okay.
So
What a weird story.
And it's and it's pretty good microcosm of how Washington works.
I guess.
Here's another one that's in trouble, and she hasn't even gotten here yet, and that's Gina Haspel.
Okay.
Reports say that she sought to withdraw of her questions about her role in agency interrogation program. She tried to do that on Friday, but Trump's not letting her.
What happened to the deep state? Why don't they get her out of there?
I don't know. But Trump is saying, no. The only reason that she wants to withdraw or she needs to be is because Democrats are weak on war on terror.
Yes. That's a good reason to resign or not stay. Okay. Well, that is an odd one, certainly. I'm still stuck on Pruitt. He's wearing a weird ribbon on his lapel in this picture, which looks like a made-up military ribbon. I don't know what's going on with that.
Who was the one that made up coins of themselves and basically was and flags, and that was Ryan Zinke?
Yeah, and Zinke and Pruitt are in a contest, like for which one is most corrupt. And their staffs release dirt on the other secretary with some regularity, and I think the initial round of stories about Pruitt and his condo rental may have been one of these retaliatory leaks because, one's staffer used to date the other one's staffer and they broke up and they're fighting now. So they're releasing dirt on one another. And I think it's an incredible situation. But Pruitt, I liked how they're like, Pruitt is growing paranoid and reclusive. He was building a soundproof booth from day one, but he's growing reclusive and paranoid. This is very interesting. And if he had more money to start with, he'd be just like Trump. I don't know whether Trump will ever cut him loose because he's not really loyal to anybody, or whether you remind me of me.
Well, that's the thing. Trump doesn't like to cut people loose, first of all, because he's afraid to fire people because he's a coward. But the other side of the coin is he hates looking weak. And he figures that Democrats would just assume that it's a scalp that they got, which, of course, there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why he's keeping him around. But, of course, the more he keeps him around, the worse he looks. And in a nutshell, that's, Trump's dilemmas about all of this stuff. If he gets rid of Gina Haspel, he gets rid of a problem because people around the world look at her and say that is, really a big issue. Yeah. I mean, that opens up all sorts of stuff about what happened way back in 2003 and the whole war in Iraq thing. And the dirty hippies, talking about the fact that maybe it wasn't such a good war. And still are things coming out about torture and Abu Ghraib and stuff like that we collectively would like not to remember. But we're not very good at talking about things that happened in those days. And probably one of the best examples of that, of course, is Rudy Giuliani. Why is Giuliani even a celebrity anymore? It's because of what happened on 9/11. But in the days prior to that, he was actually a failed mayor that people really had not much use for. And since then, he's the same racist jerk that he always was, and is now coming out because he's on national TV. He didn't change. He's always been like this. But the problem is that right after 9/11, you needed heroes. You needed people to rally around. So George W. Bush had 90% approval, and Rudy Giuliani was America's mayor because, that's what people wanted. So the media, who itself was very shaken and based in New York, made Rudy the star, even though a lot of his decisions, like moving the Emergency Operations Center from Brooklyn to the World Trade Center so it could be destroyed, were incredibly bad.
Lots of bad stuff there.
But, you don't want to talk about that because you needed to believe in stuff.
I guess you
so
didn't want
that's
anyway.
where the Rudy myth came from, and it is a myth. And now that you see him real time, you go, oh, my goodness, we really made him like America's mayor? Really?
I don't know. We had a very weird period we were going through. We were hanging out with Cocaine Mitch too much, I guess. Maybe that had something to do with it. Studio 54 still lingering in memory. But, we did that with a lot of people. We're doing it again almost with John McCain as he closes out his chapter, I think. And I'd see some interesting reminders this weekend as he's sort of setting himself up with his memoirs and closing the books. as it were, we're reminded, wasn't Sarah Palin your fault? Yes, that's right. Introducing like casual idiocy into national politics, know-nothingism.
No, he wanted Joe Lieberman. Isn't Joe Lieberman a big mistake?
Right. Well, there was that.
Not as big a mistake as Sarah Palin because he actually chose her.
Yes. And but very interesting. Well, I'll cover it perhaps later on. But he's setting himself up for some myth making himself, and it's hard not to do it. You get into these periods where post 9/11, you're psychologically tormented, and you do something dumb like say Rudy Giuliani is a good guy, and in the face of the end of a long political career and death, John McCain gets similar treatment, but I'm seeing a lot of pushback on it, and it's uncomfortable because he's dying and it doesn't feel right, but he did it, so we have to, because truth and all that stuff, and if we let that go, then we're finished. We're already in the middle of it. We got enough gaslighting going on. We shouldn't do it to ourselves.
Right. Meanwhile, Talking Points Memo just wrote up Rudy's media blitz over the weekend, which was pretty remarkable and well worth talking about. Their headline is, in bizarre interview, Giuliani says some of his own statements are just rumors.
Okay.
Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani on Sunday called his own public statements rumors and contradicted them several times when pressed about a hush money payment made on Trump's behalf to an adult film star. Giuliani also said Trump's longtime fixer Michael Cohen, himself the subject of a months-long criminal investigation, could have made other such hush money payments. Yeah, I suppose that's what the money could have been for. Something along those lines is what he said. Is that even remarkable? Well, he said like 97 things. Rudy's the perfect example of how Trump does media. You say 100 contradictory things, and it's hard to focus on any one of them because there's just a torrent of them.
Yeah, and none of them are all that important when proven to be untrue. Well, many people say a lot of the things, or even all the things I say are untrue.
In fact, what he said was, I'm not focusing on facts right now. I'm focusing on the law.
Oh, there's two sides from which to do that. Yeah, right.
And all the lawyers said, wait a minute.
Yeah, well, one, you're wrong, and two, I mean, that's what the burglar said. Well, I'm focusing on the law too.
Yeah, exactly. What can get me off? I don't really care about the facts.
Ugh. Country going to hell, etc.
Right. So Asha Rangappa, a former FBI agent, now works as a TV analyst and senior lecturer at Yale, said it's astonishing, especially from someone who has been so supportive of law enforcement for as long as he has. I can't believe anybody believes he really believes what he's saying. But it's a standard defense. When you don't have the facts on your side, you attack the investigators.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know what makes him think he's been supported. I mean, he's bought into the myth to a certain extent, too. And maybe he's just playing along.
Remember that Bill Kristol thing we read a couple of days ago? I mean, the whole idea is that this is a PR campaign, not a legal campaign. As Matt Taibbi points out on Twitter, Rudy Giuliani is the only person on earth capable of Dan Quailing Trump, making him look less idiotic by comparison.
I suspect there are more such people, but he's a great example.
Right. So, personnel choices were never Trump's strong suit, as we talked about with the cabinet. And, picking Rudy as his personal lawyer, he's looking for something. He's looking for a lot of noise and a lot of smoke so that he can step behind the curtain and nobody will see. I don't think it's going to work. Will it work with his base? Anything and everything will work with his base. They've already committed for various and sundry reasons.
Yes.
And so if you have people who are committed to you and then you do a thing and then pat yourself on the back for being such a genius because that thing worked. It would have worked if you did nothing. It would have worked if you did something else. They've already made up their mind to stick with him. Fine.
It doesn't work.
They're not numerous enough to outvote everybody else. And, people are really enthused about trying to get rid of a lot of the excesses of the Trump administration. And that has a lot to do with honesty and rule of law and the corruption. So let's see how the primaries go tomorrow, and let's see who we're running against. That'll tell us a lot about where the country's going. And with that, that's my segment for today. Normal length, I suppose.
Yes, I would say
but,
so.
But, there's that whole piece that Dave Farenthold and a couple other people wrote in the Washington Post about where Trump's money came from. And, how all of a sudden he went from the king of debt and borrowing stuff to all of a sudden paying cash for everything. Where did that money come from?
Yes.
And by the way, when Trump was a real estate guy in New York, trying to skirt around regulations and rules and so on and so forth, how much did he pay Rudy?
I don't know. And that's
Is that
a
where
good
they
question.
know each other from?
More than likely.
It would be irresponsible not to speculate.
Yeah, they know each other from Saturday Night Live.
Among other places.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll do it again.
Okay. And this will still be happening. But we'll know who we're running against. Maybe. Although maybe they'll be counting and recounting and suing one another for a couple of weeks. That's a possibility, too.
We'll also have some primary results to talk about, having set it up for today. Take care, and I'll talk to you.
All right. Thanks very much. You do the same. We'll see you tomorrow. Or no, Wednesday. That's almost... I might as well just skip right to Wednesday at this point. All right. What do we do with this? At this point, do we have to put these stories on the record, and I think we might just have to comb through them on the air and read through them, even though you've likely read a lot of them yourselves. But I'll bet they raise some questions for you. I bet there's some comments you'd like to add on those stories, certainly comments I'd like to add on those stories. And we'll see how many of these things we can get through. How shall we do it? Just to change gears a little bit, because we talked a little bit about all the big time stories from over the weekend, and we'll get to those. I want to get to one other that I hinted at, and we sidle up to it somewhat obliquely. This is actually Zach Carter and Arthur Delaney's story from the weekend in the HuffPost, as they now go by. How the Acorn scandal seeded today's nightmare politics. I think all of that clicks for you instantly in the background. You know exactly how the Acorn scandal seeded today's nightmare politics. But this is where my McCain comments come from, because right up top you see right away the reason why you can't allow the gaslighting / lionizing of John McCain to go on, even in light of his impending death, in all likelihood. But this brings together a lot of threads that are still around and still need to be rooted out and destroyed in American politics, and we're still a long way from getting that job done. So let me share this one with you. How the Acorn scandal seeded today's nightmare politics. Subhead here. Breitbart. Yes, Breitbart led the charge. They're still around. But Democrats delivered the killing blow. Has anyone really learned? There's a little bit in here for everybody. And, I'm not in love with the approach necessarily of, let's make sure that we throw in something about Democrats as well. But it is honest and worthy of note, because some rather sizable mistakes were made. And I guess it's questionable whether anybody or everybody or enough people learned, and what did they learn. I think a lot of lessons were learned by a lot of Democrats, but not as thoroughly as I would have hoped they would have been learned. And also, there are some major incidents involved in these are bits and pieces that set up that backhand to Democrats having been responsible for a lot of this, and it's not something to be ignored. But some of the waypoints in all of this, I think, are more important to what we were discussing this morning anyway, if not necessarily this story's arc. Are you ready for this one? Here's where the reporting begins. It did not occur to Bertha Lewis to be afraid. It's one of those sort of novelesque beginnings to the piece. You remember Bertha Lewis? She was watching the final presidential debate of 2008, and John McCain had just said something insane. Now, this is supposed to set up Bertha Lewis and the Acorn thing, and who is she, and do you remember Bertha Lewis, and how Acorn's destruction came about. And it should, and it will, and there will be fault for Democrats in there if that's what you're holding on for. But more to my earlier point about John McCain, this story. Ready? What was the insane thing that John McCain said in a debate in 2008? Quote, "We need to know the full extent of Senator Obama's relationship with Acorn, who is now on the verge of maybe perpetrating one of the greatest frauds in voter history in this country, maybe destroying the fabric of democracy, the Arizona Republican proclaimed. Now, right here from the actual fringes of historical destruction of the fabric of democracy, doesn't that seem a little bit over the top to you at the time? But remember, of course, we all know that the Acorn stuff was largely fabricated based on, a kernel of truth plus thousands of pounds of intentional misunderstanding / lying BS from Breitbart. That's huge. But think about how huge it is on the record of John McCain, who looks like he wants very badly to go out as being remembered as Maverick again, an anti-Trumper and savior of the republic, even though his voting record didn't really live up to it, certainly. And there was a nice vote at one point that, kind of was a death blow to the Obamacare repeal hopes and all that. And, well, thanks, but at the same time, so, setting aside what I think is a direct line of responsibility for Trump via Sarah Palin. Let's even if you assume he was somehow hoodwinked into doing that or panicked into making that selection, there's still this. I mean, on his own in the debate to say, one, to buy into Breitbart's insane character assassination against Acorn and everybody in it, facilitated by, bad / intentionally misleading, lying, quote, reporting and the James O'Keefe stunt, et cetera, et cetera. This is like the first instance of alt-right, quote, news handing one of those BS stories straight to a presidential campaign and having it be granted legitimacy by being used as a debate talking point when the whole country and all of the punditry and all of the, middle of the road voters who just aren't really sure, the Ken Bones of the world are watching, and he launches into this thing. This was a big turning point for everybody. And the rest of the story is largely about how it's a turning point for Acorn, but this is, to me, a bigger turning point for where the rest of us are, too, even if you had nothing to do with Acorn, or even if you were only in the role of being bitterly disappointed by the rest of the story they're hoping to illustrate here, where the Democrats cave on Acorn and help destroy them. Still, you'll want to keep this in mind. So again, back to the story. Bertha Lewis, had been leading Acorn, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, Acorn, for about 5 months, new on the job. Acorn advocated for the poor, and you can't have that. In addition to helping families navigate federal aid programs, the group ran campaigns to improve city sanitation, protested against predatory lenders, and registered people to vote. All pretty good stuff, right? The nation's top Republican politician had just declared this body of work tantamount to stealing an election. It was absurd, Lewis said in a recent interview. Those words had no meaning. Does that sound familiar at all? Are we still in that same pattern? The words have no meaning. But they're not just similar to Trump in that they have no meaning, but also it should be noted, I think prominently, similar to Trump, because Trump doesn't write his own stuff with no meaning. It came from Breitbart, and you know who also came from Breitbart and ran his campaign, and it should be familiar to you by now that there's, a continuing conspiracy to actually destroy the fabric of democracy. And if you think I'm overstating it, ask the guy who ran Breitbart whether he's interested in destroying that fabric or not, and he'll say yes, and he'll cite 6 scholarly-sounding books that he once maybe read that make it sound like he knows what the hell he's talking about, and then we just la-di-da our way on from there. If anything, Lewis reasoned, the attack was probably good news. Interesting. Republicans had always loathed Acorn, in no small part because poor voters tend to vote Democrat, ick, I would say. But open inflammatory denunciations of the group were generally confined to the talk radio fringe. Lewis had been bogged down in a top-to-bottom overhaul of Acorn's financial and managerial structure ever since she accepted her promotion. If GOP leaders were escalating things in October, she figured it meant she was running a solid voter registration operation, despite all the paperwork she'd been buried in. McCain's debate paranoia wasn't an isolated outburst. It became the Republican Party's closing pitch for the 2008 election, amplified in political media. U.S. newspapers published over 1,700 stories on Acorn. This was the but-her emails of its day, apparently. During October, 1,700 stories on Acorn during October, more than 10 times the average monthly total so far for that year. More than 3/4 of these stories were devoted to allegations of, quote, voter fraud. The illegal voting accusations never panned out. What do you know? But within 18 months, Lewis would be forced to close Acorn's doors, exhausted, short-staffed, out of money, and most important, out of allies. Acorn had survived for more than 40 years. Its sudden collapse was a defining moment in the 21st century American politics. The explosive cocktail of racism, dishonesty, incompetence, and cowardice that brought down the organization reveals as much about Washington Democrats as it does about the conservative movement. It marked the Republican Party's full transition from the coded winks and nods of Richard Nixon's Southern strategy to the bellicose white nativism that defines Donald Trump, and it exposed the Democratic Party establishment, unprepared for dirty tricks in the digital age and unwilling to defend many of the black voters and activists it claimed to represent. Very troubling, very true, very worthy of further investigation. We'll read on after the break. I would point out, though, it's also an interesting tale because for many white politicians not representing anything close to an urban area, maybe even the first they'd ever heard of Acorn, which is astonishing in its privilege. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and let's continue with this story just for a little while longer. It's a very long story, and you could easily, if you read all the way through it, spend the rest of the show on it, but there's so much more to go on. But just as a reminder, or I suppose maybe even more than a reminder to some listeners, it's going on 10 years ago here, so it's entirely possible that the Acorn story is one that happened and faded from memory before people came of political age who might actually be listening to the show. But for the most part, I think we're all oldsters. But it's a good reminder. I don't remember, for instance, specifically remember that line in the debate, and that largely probably comes from not having watched the debate, because I almost never do watch the debates, but certainly even the discussion afterwards. You know, the highlights usually get remembered because of the discussion and digestion of the debates afterwards. But no, I missed that one about the voter fraud accusations. And I mean, I don't know. I guess I can't recall even from this time around how active was John McCain in trying to dismiss or untangle the lies about voter fraud this time around. And do I give him credit for it if he, in fact, did speak up on the subject? But all right, I'll get back to the story just for more reminders. After McCain lost the 2008 election, in case you didn't realize that he had done that, yes, he did. His allegations of a vast Acorn conspiracy to steal the election looked even more preposterous. Nobody could find a single fraudulent vote that had been cast by someone connected to Acorn, but the Acorn story kept bouncing around conservative media anyway. Prosecutors in a few states cited a handful of Acorn employees for shoddy voter registration, submitting incomplete forms or paperwork with bogus names like Donald Duck or Tony Romo. That's an actual name, of course, but wasn't the name of the person who filled out the form. That's the important point. In many cases, Acorn itself had flagged the faulty documents before turning them over to state officials, since election laws required that all registration paperwork an organization had collected be turned in. This detail often wasn't included in the stories, one of the most overlooked of them. But like I said, we were in but her emails mode before we knew what "but her emails" actually meant at the time. And so, yes, that was the focus. They turned in fraudulent paperwork. Yes, well, the law says you can't weed it out. You have to turn it in, and then the appropriate authorities can act on it at some later point, but you can't hide it from them just because, even if you think you're doing everybody a favor by saying, I'm not going to process this paperwork, it's obviously fake. The law says you have to. Plus, they flag it themselves. But no, all that gets reported. By the way, and that's very much in John McCain's maverick style, prior to any of his runs for president. I guess there was just only the one run for president. But prior to his, there wasn't. There was the primaries, 8 years prior to that, where he was humiliated by George W. Bush, who, using the same tactics. But even back then, he remember his pork busters books. He used to, come out with reports of wasteful spending that he thought should be cut from the budget of the United States, which usually engaged in the same game. Tell half the story. Tell the absurd side of the story of weird-sounding studies that actually, if you sat down and took a look through them, you would find, okay, I understand why they're doing it this way and what the goal of this research is, and it's important, and it's a huge industry, and it employs lots of people, but it sounds funny. Same thing here. Well, Donald Duck, Tony Romo. Yeah, but they flagged those, and they have to turn them in. Oh, well, never mind all that. Clearly, Acorn is responsible for that. So, after all of this, in September of 2009, everybody seemed to forget about Acorn voter fraud entirely. New story. Right-wing provocateurs James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles. Is he Giles or Giles? And by the way, they get that. Provocateurs, which at least it's not, investigative reporters, but basically professional liars funded by, our own class of American oligarchs, released a batch of undercover videos through Andrew Breitbart's new website that appeared to show Acorn employees offering to help O'Keefe get away with all kinds of outrages, including dodging tax payments for an underage prostitution ring that he claimed he wanted to smuggle into the country. There's a lot of underage prostitution fantasies among these guys, and frankly, I would not want to see myself as a private citizen what's on their computers, but it might be of interest to law enforcement. Fox News pumped out updates on the story day after day as more videos were released in a slow trickle. O'Keefe appeared on Fox and Friends dressed like a 1970s stereotype of a pimp one morning, and Breitbart and Giles would make Sean Hannity's show another evening. And of course, you remember that in the tapes, he's not wearing anything like that while he's inside the Acorn offices, but it is spliced into the video nonetheless, and everybody was, at the time, for whatever reason, like, video, therefore, a true documentary. And that was it. It was much juicier than the stale voter fraud story. Both Hannity and Glenn Beck, remember that guy, ran segments in which a California Acorn employee supposedly confessed to murdering her husband. Okay, that's linked. You can look it up. Several formal investigations would later find that although the undercover videos may have been embarrassing, Acorn workers didn't violate any laws. The district attorney's office in Brooklyn found no criminality after a 5-month investigation. Sounds familiar also. Neither did the California Attorney General's office. The murder, quote, confession touted by Fox turned out to be a prank by an Acorn employee who'd caught on to the stunt. State investigators interviewed her ex-husbands, who are all still very much alive. In an interview with Huffington Post, or HuffPost as we now call it, O'Keefe said it's wrong to focus on whether his work covered actual criminality. It exposed immorality. It exposed soullessness, he said. Undercover work is about testing and affirming what people are willing to do. I don't know that I would agree with that in any situation, but okay. O'Keefe has clung to the fact that Acorn workers in Baltimore gave him tax advice for his illegal business, including tips on, quote, how to disguise my 13 underage El Salvadoran sex girls on the tax returns, unquote, as he claimed on Reddit in January. In fact, similar story here to the voter registration thing. In fact, after being told the girls didn't have social security numbers, the Acorn worker told O'Keefe that, quote, we can't use them at all. According to unedited transcripts originally posted to Breitbart's site, Confronted about the transcript, O'Keefe said it was still highly immoral for Acorn employees to help him report illegal income to the IRS. But even that's questionable, since illegal income is supposed to be reported to the IRS. You might not think so, but it is. One of the things a tax preparer has to do when you have a client with illegal income, this is the problem with illegal income, is navigate between reporting illegal income, which must be done, and protecting the client's right not to incriminate himself, according to Larry Zelinak, a tax professor at Duke University School of Law. The crime may well have been committed in the Acorn offices by O'Keefe. California state law prohibits non-consensual recordings of confidential conversations. We had learned that long ago in the Linda Tripp, Monica Lewinsky story, but we forgot it in the 10 years in between, I guess. The state granted him immunity from potential charges, though, in exchange for access to his complete recordings. Why? I'll give you evidence of my crime in exchange for immunity from it. Good deal. Way to go. Okay. But it didn't wipe out his liability in civil lawsuits, and O'Keefe eventually agreed to pay a $100,000 settlement to a former Acorn employee who had actually contacted the police after O'Keefe's visit, but was portrayed in the video as a willing collaborator. As part of the settlement, O'Keefe said he regretted any pain he caused the man. I wonder if he paid it. It's linked here, and I suppose you could look it up and find out. But Washington didn't wait around for the facts to come out. On September 14th, 2009, I have to go at least this far because this is where the Democrats screw things up. On September 14th, 2009, the Democratic-controlled Senate voted 83-7. The Democratic-controlled Senate, which could have just tabled this resolution, voted 83-7 to block some federal grants to Acorn. Government funding typically accounted for 10 to 15% of Acorn's annual funding. The group received $48.4 million from the federal government from 2005 to 2009, most of it, including a $25 million grant in 2008, for housing counseling and foreclosure mitigation. And really, who needed to mitigate foreclosures at that point, right? What? On September 17th, the House followed suit, with 172 Democrats joining 173 Republicans in voting to defund Acorn, including some of the most progressive voices in the party, such as Representatives Rosa DeLauro, Lloyd Doggett, and John Conyers. Today, Democrats don't like to talk about that vote. Several told HuffPost they didn't remember how they voted or why they voted the way they did. I bet there are a lot of people who don't remember it because they say, no, I voted against that, and they just wish they had. Anyway, they don't remember how they voted or why they voted the way they did, other than to note the vote occurred amid a rash of scandalous Acorn headlines. Democrats panicked and felt like they had to be a part of that. Representative Raul Grijalva, one of the 75 Democrats who voted no, told HuffPost. Democrats had assumed a defensive posture following the electoral victories in November of 2008 and wanted to focus on their policy agenda, according to Representative Jerry Connolly of Virginia, who missed that vote. We're fighting about Dodd-Frank, we're fighting about stimulus, we're fighting about the Affordable Care Act, and we're fighting about climate change and cap and trade, Connolly said. Huge battles, huge. I think the calculus for some of my colleagues was, how much political capital do I want to expend on this when I have these other big ones? And I think that's probably true. And the most genteel way possible to express the issue, and it is true. There was, there's certain limitations on political capital. There was, of course, we've just or just about to install no drama Obama, and we do have a bunch of big things, and we're still this mindset of, well, if we just compromise in certain ways, then we'll disarm the attacks of the Republicans. And now, in hindsight, and several of us knew right up front then and there that it wasn't going to work this way. They were having secret meetings that were actually revealed contemporaneously, so it wasn't very secret. Well, let's make sure we do whatever it takes to make Obama a one-term president. And he wasn't a one-term president, and it was pretty obvious that he wasn't going to be a one-term president pretty quickly. But we were, that was always hanging in the background. And so we're negotiating away enormous and important parts of the stimulus. And let's not even bother thinking about actual macroeconomics or anything like it, and what we know the effects of a stimulus program are likely to be if done correctly. Let's instead, maybe we'll get some Republican votes if we say we give some of it away in tax cuts. And that we did get some. We got what we needed to get past the filibuster. But then it became a pattern. Let's give away, certain concessions on the Affordable Care Act. A big deal. It's a big effing deal, just like Joe Biden said it was. But of course, this will only bring back memories of, well, why isn't there a public option in this? Or why do you approach things this way? Or why didn't you go whole hog on this? And, we still have this bitter resentment lingering among a number of Democrats and nominal allies. Why didn't the Affordable Care Act go farther? Well, we were still shopping for allies that were never available to us. But for some reason, some of the people in charge of holding these votes and casting these votes in Congress didn't believe that those votes weren't available. And there's probably a pretty strong overlap, I would say, with Democrats who didn't have any serious working familiarity with ACORN at the time and weren't able to overcome the stigma that had been imposed by the bad headlines. And I don't know what their districts were like offhand. Conyers clearly should have had a pretty good background in what ACORN was about. And I don't know what was driving his vote. Rosa DeLauro, certainly, yes, very progressive. Lloyd Doggett, very progressive. Is ACORN that active in their districts? I don't know. But, and that may not explain it necessarily. But a lot of, remember also a lot of the Democrats that we were working with there, and this will reopen more old wounds, of course. A lot of the Democrats we were working with were people who had been selected in a calculated fashion to win swing districts and were more focused on trying to change the image still of Democrats to more pro-business and not explicitly anti-corporate actors of the progressive wing, let's say. And even the progressives weren't typically all that interested necessarily in being seen as anti-corporate at the time. And so it wouldn't surprise me if it was like, well, look, I know I want to keep funding. In the absence of controversy, I will keep voting to fund ACORN because the people I trust from the committees of jurisdiction continue to report that this is an important effort, and I will vote to continue our policies. But when it brings down heat, I don't want anything to do with it. I didn't study the issue. They're not active in my district. I don't know what they do. I just know that they bring trouble. And in some cases, I know what they do, but I don't care that much because I have other big things on my plate that I'd like to get done, even if it is, in some cases, things I'd like to get done for the same people served by ACORN. So, yeah, you could see, he's not completely off the mark here, Jerry Connolly, in saying, how much political capital do I expend over this group that I'm not that familiar with because I delegated the responsibility of familiarity to some other committee, whereas I am pretty aware of how much is at stake over stimulus and the Affordable Care Act. All right. There's, I guess, just a little bit more to it, but and there's a lot more to the story. At this point, though, I'll say I think we've recommended the story pretty highly to you. There's a lot more background, a lot more nuance, a lot more discussion points in there. I recommend you take a look through the rest of the story. Now, probably time to turn to the stuff that really occupied our minds, mostly over the weekend. And gosh, there's a lot of it, and it's all over the place. I mentioned at first the Washington Post, David Fahrenthold, on the story along with Jack Gillum and Jonathan O'Connell, the story entitled "As the King of Debt," which I think we have at least 2 or maybe 3 kings of debt in the Trump cabinet. I mean, didn't what's his name, the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross also called himself the king of debt at some point. Maybe Steve Mnuchin at the same or along the same lines. But anyway, as the self-proclaimed king of debt, Donald Trump, we're talking about, borrowed to build his empire. That is to say, his initial housing real estate-based family empire. Lots of borrowing on, speculation. You borrow the money, develop the housing, sell it off for more money. It's a, normal business model in real estate, and that's how they did things. And then, they note in the headline, then he began spending hundreds of millions of dollars in cash. And it's a big question mark for O'Connell, Farenthold, and Gillum, even though they really know the answer. The legal department, no doubt, said, well, you can't say it yet because we can't prove it yet, and if we get sued, we're going to have a problem. You and I, we can say, we know it's Russia. We know how all of this stuff coincided. In the 9 years before he ran for president, Donald Trump's company spent more than $400 million in cash on his new properties. People who know him from television and television alone say, what's the big deal? He's a bazillionaire. He's sitting on piles of cash. He can buy $400 million in property in cash at any time outright. Those of us who are a little more familiar with his operations and his failures over the years know that, one, he always had to borrow to build the things he actually did build back in the day. Two, that no banks were willing to lend him any more money because he keeps not paying that money back. That's how it was that he ended up with that giant string of bankruptcies. And three, that Donald Trump didn't have those piles of cash at all and was getting them from somebody else, obviously, because of those bankruptcies. No one was lending. It wasn't consistent with his old model. Banks hated him because he was bankrupt all the time, and because he's bankrupt all the time, there's no way he has $400 million in cash. Get the story? So in the 9 years before he ran for president, Trump's company spent more than $400 million all of a sudden in cash on new properties, including 14 transactions paid for in full without borrowing from banks, which he could no longer do. During a buying binge that defied real estate industry practices and Trump's own history as the self-described king of debt. You might ask yourself, even if you're one of the people who believes, well, of course Donald Trump did that. He's a billionaire many times over. He has $400 million in cash. If he has $400 million in cash, why the string of bankruptcies? Why? Don't know. He's bankrupt, but $400 billion in cash. Paid for in full without borrowing from banks. Even though he had to do that because banks wouldn't lend to him. But banks will lend to anybody who's got $400 million in cash to drop because they know they'll get repaid. How did these two weird things come together? Trump's vast outlay of cash, tracked through public records and totaled publicly here for the first time, provides a new window into the president's private company, which discloses few details about its finances. It shows that Trump had access to far more cash than previously known, despite his string of commercial bankruptcies and the Great Recession's hammering of the real estate industry. Yeah, how did you get all that money? Why did the king of debt, as he called himself in interviews, turn away from that strategy? I know how to make billions of dollars. I've been very successful, and it's formulaic. I know exactly how to do it. I have a very good eye for real estate and a very good sense of the business. But I'm going to stop doing all of that and do everything the exact opposite way in businesses I have no experience in whatsoever. Okay? Just because reasons. Why did the king of debt, as he called himself, turn away from that strategy, defying real estate wisdom, that it's unwise to risk so much of one's own money on a few projects? And how did Trump, who had money tied up in golf courses and buildings, raise enough liquid assets to go on this cash buying spree? Good question. Now, long story short, the answer is Russia, but let's lay it out in detail. From the outside, it is difficult to assess how much cash the Trump organization has on hand. Eric Trump, son of the president who helps manage the company, told the Washington Post that none of the cash used to purchase the 14 properties came from outside investors or from selling off major Trump Organization assets. Instead, Eric Trump said the firm's existing businesses, commercial buildings in New York, licensing deals for Trump-branded hotels and clothes and glassware, produced so much cash that the Trumps could tap that flow for spending money. He had incredible cash flow and built incredible wealth, Eric Trump said. He didn't need to think about borrowing for every transaction. We invested in ourselves. He added, it's a very nice luxury to have. And it's true. It would be a very nice luxury to have if you had it. He didn't have it. Of course, remember that this is a revisionist history and that there are claims elsewhere. When asked, how are you buying all these golf courses by golf reporters for golf magazines, the answer was, oh, Russians give us the money. And now, of course, that's a suspect thing to say. So instead it was, oh, we just had it lying around despite bankruptcy. The cash purchases began with a $12.6 million estate in Scotland in 2006. In the next 2 years, he snapped up 2 homes in Beverly Hills, then 5 golf clubs along the East Coast, and a winery in Virginia. The biggest cash binge came at last in the year before Trump announced his run for president. In 2014, he paid a combined $79.7 million for large golf courses in Scotland and Ireland. Since then, those clubs have lost money while Trump renovated them, requiring him to pump in $164 million in cash to keep them running. Trump's lavish spending came at a time when his business was leaning largely on one major financial institution for its new loans, still able to get some loans, Deutsche Bank, which provided $295 million in financing for big projects in Miami and Washington. Eric Trump said his father wasn't forced to turn to a cash-heavy strategy. Trump could have borrowed more if he wanted, he said, but he had soured on borrowing in general, Eric Trump said, after contending with unpaid debts in the early 1990s. Those lessons undoubtedly shaped his business approach and the conservative nature of how we conduct business today, Eric Trump said. Real estate investors typically don't buy big properties with their money alone. See Jared Kushner, Vornado Partners, etc., right? They find partners to invest and banks to lend alongside them. That allows the investors to amplify their buying power, and it increases the odds of earning higher returns. For privately held real estate firms, basically, they like to use as much debt as they can. The only brakes are put on by the lending institutions who don't want to lend too much, said David Geltner, a professor of real estate finance at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Industry experts said avoiding loans can alleviate risk for real estate companies and allow them to maneuver more quickly, but they said that approach is typically undertaken by cash-rich investors that aren't focused on maximizing the money they make off a property, or by companies that aren't trying to minimize their tax bills, because interest payments on mortgages are often tax deductible. Companies that have trouble obtaining loans would also turn to cash, they noted. So who would turn to cash? Companies that have trouble obtaining loans, and cash-rich investors. Normally, we wouldn't think of Donald Trump after a string of bankruptcies as being cash-rich or not in possession of enough cash that we could actually legally account for. But suddenly, he did have it. And Eric was telling everybody, oh yeah, it's Russians. And now he's embarrassed about having said that. So who else might do this cash down investment strategy? People who can't get loans, Donald Trump. People who are suddenly cash rich somehow, which apparently Donald Trump was, even though there's no legitimate explanation for it. And people who aren't focused on maximizing the money they make off a property. That is, people who, and you think, well, that doesn't describe Donald Trump. He's always interested in maximizing the money he makes off of anything. True. But what if it's A, not his money, and B, the people who are investing, quote unquote, investing it with him aren't actually interested primarily in the maximum return, but rather turning that money, they would even take a loss so long as the money is turned into clean and quote-unquote legitimate dollars. In other words, if they're laundering money, they might actually be interested in making such an investment. Does that describe Donald Trump's situation? Well, that sounds a little closer to the mark, doesn't it? Well, anyway, I guess long story or long setup for the story short on this one anyway. There's nobody out there who is an expert in real estate investment who says it makes any sense to suddenly change the approach and walk away from the successful formula of buying on debt. But he did it. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just kind of trying to scan through things and trying to find a way to shorten the story a little bit here. The next section of the article that we're reading about the Donald Trump, who used to call himself the king of debt, shying away suddenly at a particular moment in time from the formula of going heavily into debt in order to invest in and gain real estate holdings and then turn around and sell them and profit in the end. Suffice to say, it was not only conventional wisdom, it was the subject of most of Donald Trump's business writings. I mean, I do note that the Warlock was listening along and says, well, sure, there's an explanation for the sudden money. Trump is a great businessman, which I'm sure he's not. I don't think he's endorsing the position. But, yeah, he's just saying lots of people would be very willing to believe that right up front. That's a widely held, if stupid, belief in America about Donald Trump, is that I don't know what he does. He's just a great businessman, and therefore $400 million in cash can appear. In fact, more than $400 million, because if you're going to spend $400 million, presumably you have more than that. If investing your own cash is purported, as Eric Trump says it is, to be a conservative approach to the business, then surely there's more than $400 million sitting there. On the other hand, he could be saying, well, I have $400 million. Let's put it all out there and go back into debt, because I'm only kidding when I say I no longer like debt. But, of course, all of this coincided with, one, a huge influx of money into the United States of stolen cash in the hands of Russian oligarchs looking to launder it, and two, his sudden association with Michael Cohen, who also strangely was interested in the same sorts of deals and suddenly came into large wads of cash that just happened to be laying around that nobody really cared about maximizing return on for some strange reason. All right. So let's see. Getting on down further in the article, there's a discussion of his sudden buying binge. After several low years in the 1990s, Trump began to rebuild his real estate business with borrowed money. He was still into that. He got mortgages to buy an office building on Wall Street, golf courses in Florida and New York, a $700,000 home in Palm Beach, Florida. George Ross, a senior counsel who advised Trump for 25 years, summed up the developer's attitude toward debt in one sentence: borrow as much as you can for as long as you can. Ross wrote in his book, Trump Strategies for Real Estate. In the book, Ross explained that borrowing allowed Trump to seed his money into multiple projects at once, then fill out the rest with loans and partners' investments, protecting his bank account and getting significant tax write-offs on the interest he had to pay. When Trump invests in a real estate project, he typically puts up less of his own money than you might think, Ross wrote, explaining how Trump followed this rule. Typically, his investors in the project will put up 85%, while Trump puts up 15%. Of course, then they allow him to go around saying, I own this thing. And that's how he builds the fame, and people want to latch onto the fame. Understandable, and not a bad strategy. Then in 2006, the same year Ross's book was published, it was, I guess, rendered obsolete because Trump changed his approach. He began buying up land near Aberdeen on Scotland's North Sea coast. Trump ultimately paid $12.6 million for the property. He'd spent at least $50 million more to build a golf course there, which was wrapped up in land use fights and didn't open until 2012. Even his closest senior advisors in New York were surprised that Trump paid cash, recounted Neil Hobday, a British developer who worked on the Aberdeen project with Trump. Why did he do it? Hobday said it was a personal connection. Trump's mother was born in Scotland. He was, I believe, mystically connected and hooked on this project. All my conversations with him were almost on an emotional rather than a hard business level, Hobday wrote in an email to the Post. But Trump soon began to buy other properties in cash in places far from his mother's homeland. In 2008 and 2009, he paid $17.4 million in cash for two neighboring Beverly Hills homes. In 2009, he spent at least $6.7 million on two golf clubs, one outside New York City and another outside of Philly. In Charlottesville, $16.2 million for that winery. Here's some pictures of him landing in the Trump helicopter at the winery. Long tie and everything. Weird posture striding across the lawn in front of all the cameras. By 2011, Trump had spent $46 million on all cash purchases. Public records reveal some details about the Trump Organization's finances during that time period. The company was taking in tens of millions from the sale of residential properties, including a home in Palm Beach for $95 million in 2008. Everyone remembers that, right? Totally legitimate and not having anything to do with Russia whatsoever, because he's a great businessman. Oh, the guy who bought it was from Russia? Weird. Oh, and he tore the house down? Weird. Oh, and the land was only worth about $10 million? Weird. It made money off of licensing deals. In 2015, Trump reported making at least $9.1 million from those deals over 16 months. The firm also collected rent from its commercial buildings, producing what Forbes recently estimated was $175 million annually. So what? So all he did was spend 4 years' worth of total earnings. But that wasn't all free cash. Those businesses came with costs. Salaries, renovations, taxes, payments on existing mortgages that pulled money out of the business. Those costs haven't been released. In the same period, some of Trump's companies also experienced financial problems. His publicly traded casino and hotel company declared bankruptcy in 2009, right in the middle of this. And in 2008, again, bankruptcy. Couldn't save it. Had cash just drop on all their properties because they weren't really for him. But not enough to bail out the business that has his name on it. Because, thank God, he thought, that's structured such that it doesn't hurt me that much if it goes down the toilet. And in 2008, Trump sued Deutsche Bank, the only person lending to him, the only bank lending to him. He sues Deutsche Bank to challenge the size of his payments on a loan related to his tower in Chicago. In other words, he couldn't pay them anymore either. But he had $400 million in cash. Weird. Trump's logic in that case, the 2008 financial crisis had crushed the real estate business so completely that it should be considered like an act of God, and so therefore you have to lower my payments. That was a little ridiculous. Eric Trump said that in this time, the company had accumulated enough cash to have ready spending money so it could bid on short notice. When the Trumps felt an emotional connection to a property, Eric Trump said they didn't want to wait for banks and outside partners to sign off, so they paid in cash. We want to be nimble. If we see an unbelievable opportunity or something that interests us, we want to jump on it, he said. I want to too. With lenders, every time you sneeze, you have to write a 4-page report, he added. True. Despite the distaste for bankers' paperwork, the Trump Organization still obtained loans in this period from Deutsche Bank, which is startling. But for some reason, they were still interested, despite being sued. Starting in 2012, Trump borrowed $125 million from Deutsche to purchase the Doral Golf Club in Florida and $170 million from the same bank to renovate the old post office into a hotel in Washington. Maybe you've heard of it. The Trump Organization declined to comment about why it turned to borrowing in those cases. I hate debt. I want to buy in cash. But you're the king of debt. Yeah, I changed my mind. Okay. What are you doing now? I'm borrowing money to buy these other things. I thought you said you... Look, the Russians can't buy the old post office. The government is selling it. They're not going to do that deal with Russian money. Too fishy. Okay, fine. I'll get it from Deutsche Bank. That's where I'll just have to borrow again all of a sudden. That's pretty weird. Doral, I'm not sure exactly why it happened that way. Trump spent $65 million of his own on those two deals to cover the costs that Deutsche Bank did not. Then the spending got bigger. Again, I guess we'd have to say. The year before he launched his campaign for president, Trump made the two most expensive all-cash purchases the Post found in its review. In 2014, which I remind you is the year after the Miss Universe pageant in Russia, in 2014, he shelled out $79.7 million for the huge golf resorts in Doonbeg, Ireland, and Turnberry, Scotland, both of which were losing money at the time. By the way, I don't know, would it be appropriate at this point to hearken back a couple of weeks to the story of why Brexit and why Cambridge Analytica and why Russian influence accumulated so quickly and overwhelmingly in the UK as well as in the United States at the same time, and say, you know, golf has a heritage in Scotland and in Ireland and in the UK, yes, but also interesting that most of his foreign investment also comes in hotbeds of Russian oligarch / mob money laundering, just coincidentally and weirdly. The golf courses were his most recent cash deals and last acquisitions before becoming president. The Trump Organization pursued pricey renovations on both courses, during which time the properties have continued to suffer losses. Under Trump, the two courses are at least $240 million in the hole so far, according to British and Irish corporate records. Had Trump financed the property, the risks of the investments would be shared among lenders and other partners. Geltner said it was unusual to see a company not bring in financial partners in either the purchase or construction of such large development projects. Eric Trump said that when he, his brother, Donald Trump Jr., and sister Ivanka joined their father's businesses over a decade ago, they agreed to grow the company around properties that would produce income long term. He said they would never sell any of their properties, that he expected the European clubs to lose money while they were being renovated. The Trumps planned to wait, work, and eventually make their money back. You're going to have some operational losses, and that's true, right? And then you get into the black and you make great money. Okay. During the 2016 campaign, Trump continued to brag about how he'd mastered the art of spending other people's cash. I do that all the time in business. It's called other people's money. And there's nothing like doing things with other people's money because it takes the risk, Trump told a campaign trail audience in North Carolina in September of 2016. You get a good chunk of it, and it takes the risk. Unless, of course, it is, in fact, other people's money, but you're disguising it as your money so that you can invest it in all cash purchases of real estate, which also just happens to be the favored methodology of real estate money laundering. But other than that, it's just a coincidence. Okay, well, they don't nail the coffin shut in this piece, and that wasn't the intention of it. It might have been the hope for it, but I'm sure it wasn't something the lawyers were likely to allow to be the case. But now we'll turn to a couple of other stories, which we'll try and shorten a little bit. There's the New York Times piece, and we hate the New York Times. I'm just putting it out there. That we do on Michael Cohen, how Michael Cohen, Trump's fixer, built a shadowy business empire. And the answer is the same way, with the same kind of financing, at exactly the same time, and in cooperation with the guy we just read about. William Rashbaum, Denny Hakim, Brian Rosenthal, Emily Flitter, and Jesse Drucker get the byline on this one. And this one starts like a novel, too. He was a personal injury lawyer who often worked out of taxi offices scattered around New York City. You know by now we're talking about Michael Cohen. There was the one above the rundown auto repair garage on West 16th Street in Manhattan, on the edge of the meatpacking district before it turned trendy. There was the single-story building with the garish yellow awning in the shadow of the Queensboro Bridge. There was the tan brick place on a scruffy Manhattan side street, often choked with double-parked taxis. And then there was his office on the 26th floor of Trump Tower, overlooking Fifth Avenue, right next to the one belonging to Donald J. Trump. Before he joined the Trump Organization and became Mr. Trump's lawyer and do-it-all fixer, Michael Cohen was a hard-edged personal injury attorney and businessman. Now, a significant portion of his quarter-century business record is under the microscope of federal prosecutors, posing a potential threat not just to Mr. Cohen, but also to the president. Mr. Cohen's businesses are private entities, making it difficult to get a full picture of their finances and operations, but a New York Times review of thousands of pages of public records and interviews with bankers, lawyers, and businessmen who have interacted with him reveal the degree to which he has often operated in the backwaters of the financial and legal worlds. While he has not been charged with a crime, many of his associates have either faced criminal charges or stiff regulatory penalties. That includes partners in the taxi businesses, doctors for whom he helped establish medical clinics, and lawyers with whom he worked. He spent much of his personal and professional life with immigrants from Russia and Ukraine. Okay. His father-in-law, who helped establish him in the taxi business, was born in Ukraine, as was one of Mr. Cohen's partners in that industry. Another partner was Russian, and Mr. Cohen used his connections in the region when scouting business opportunities for Mr. Trump in former Soviet republics. More recently, Mr. Cohen and his father-in-law lent more than $25 million to a Ukrainian businessman who has a checkered financial record and a history of defaulting on loans, like Trump. And Mr. Cohen long held a small stake in his uncle's catering hall, which was frequented by Russian and Italian mobsters. In addition to his legal and taxi business, Mr. Cohen had a seemingly charmed touch as a real estate investor. One day, in 2014, he sold 4 buildings in Manhattan for $32 million, entirely in cash. That was nearly 3 times what he paid for them no more than 3 years earlier. This is the type of person you'd see most bankers steer clear of, said Ben Berzin, a retired executive vice president and senior credit officer at PNC Bank, who clashed with Trump in the early 1990s over loans to the future president's troubled Atlantic City casinos. The speed with which Mr. Cohen successfully flipped real estate stands out, Mr. Berzin said. You have to ask what's going on. So, Robert Mueller will do it. The special counsel, of course, investigating the Russian interference in the 2016 election, has already been examining Mr. Cohen's conduct as part of his ongoing inquiry. Last month, federal agents executed search warrants, as you know. The warrants sought documents related to his business associates, among other things. That investigation, being conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, is apparently based on information provided by Mr. Mueller's team. Mr. Trump's lawyers are resigned to the strong possibility that the investigation of Mr. Cohen's businesses could lead him to cooperate with federal prosecutors. Mr. Cohen, after being sent a detailed list of questions, it's probably been leaked, about his business interests, responded in a text message, "You need to do real fact-checking as your questions are totally inaccurate." Now, how could a question be inaccurate? Neither he nor his lawyers have offered further comment. Trump, for his part, says Mr. Cohen was a good guy, and that federal investigators were looking at something having to do with his business. I have nothing to do with his business. Okay. Just like Mike Flynn. He's a good guy. I don't have anything to do with him. He's a good, hope you can see your way to letting him slide on this one. But I have nothing to do with his business. The president has long entrusted Mr. Cohen to represent him in matters both public and deeply private. Real estate negotiations from Fresno, California to the Republic of Georgia, and the hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, who said she had an affair with the future president. The $130,000 payment to that actress, of course, is in a way emblematic of Mr. Cohen's many business dealings. Its provenance is murky, obfuscated by a private agreement, pseudonyms, and evolving explanations. President Trump said this past week that he had paid Mr. Cohen a retainer that was used to reimburse the $130,000, directly contradicting his earlier statements that he knew of no payments to Ms. Daniels. Within the Trump organization, it was Mr. Cohen's job to deal with Mr. Trump's thorniest problems. But now, whatever problems investigators find in Mr. Cohen's own array of businesses could double back on Mr. Trump. And of course they will, because they were symbiotic in many ways. So lots to learn here, some of which we already knew, some of which is new to us in the Trump, or rather the Cohen article. But I'd like to skip at this point over to yet another one. This time, The Guardian and Ronan Farrow in The New Yorker on something that could be even more deeply troubling. The hiring of a spy firm, as it says here in the Guardian headline, for dirty ops on Iran arms deal. An Israeli agency told to find incriminating material on Obama diplomats who negotiated the deal with Tehran, and I'd like to find out why. Mark Townsend and Julian Borger wrote this for The Guardian. What do we got here? Aides to Donald Trump, the U.S. president, hired an Israeli private intelligence agency to orchestrate a dirty ops campaign against key individuals from the Obama administration who helped negotiate the Iran nuclear deal. The Observer can reveal. The Observer, but for some, okay, well, I don't know. I guess, are the Observer and the Guardian published by the same parent company? I'm not certain, but I'm reading from the Guardian's website here, but I see it's labeled the Observer. Someone more familiar with the structure can tell me a little bit about this one. By the way, even if I don't get to it, this one starts right off by saying aides to Donald Trump, the U.S. president, hired an Israeli private intelligence agency. So the accusation here is, one, that Trump aides did it, and two, that they did it while he was president, which is troubling in its own right. Though I see that there is, in addition to Ronan Farrow's reporting, word from Haaretz in Israel that sources say that the Israeli firm, Black Cube, as Greg reminded us they are called, was hired by business entity, not Trump. That's the headline. The source refutes allegations that Trump associates hired the intelligence agency to snoop on aides who worked on the Iran nuclear deal. What business entity was it? I don't know if that's named here. But, yeah, interesting that they say they were hired by a business entity and not Donald Trump or the government or people working for him while he worked for the government or whatever. So, lots of doubt still out there. It's certainly, they might get away with this one. It'd be very hard to, initially, if it wasn't for Donald Trump being the president of the United States, it would be initially difficult to believe that somebody could make such a stupid mistake or be so daring as to have presidential aides hire a foreign private spying network to do this. And that's not even to get to the question of, well, what do you think you're going to learn about the people who negotiated the Iran deal? You've already laid out a case, as dumb as it is. You've laid out your case against the Iran deal. Why not just execute your opposition to the Iran deal and blow it up? And I don't know offhand what the answer is, unless it was more projection all over again. Like, well, it works to get dirt on people and then blackmail them into doing things they might ordinarily otherwise not agree to, because it's happening to me. If I could get such dirt and then get Obama's own diplomats to say, for the sake of not having that dirt revealed, that the Iran deal was corrupt or bad in some other way and that they've changed their minds since, well, then undoing it would be that much easier and that much more simple, politically speaking. But I don't know. We're going to have to see much more evidence developed on that front. Back to the Observer article here. People in the Trump camp contacted private investigators, they say, in May of last year to get dirt, quote, get dirt on Ben Rhodes, who had been one of Barack Obama's top national security advisors, and Colin, how does he say it? Colin Powell, K-A-H-L, deputy assistant to Obama, as part of an elaborate attempt to discredit the deal. The extraordinary revelations come days before Trump's 12 May deadline to either scrap or continue to abide by the international deal limiting Iran's nuclear program. It's a little late in the game here, isn't it? Jack Straw, who as foreign secretary was involved in earlier efforts to restrict Iranian weapons, said, "These are extraordinary and appalling allegations, but which also illustrate a high level of desperation by Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, not so much to discredit the deal, but to undermine those around it." One former high-ranking British diplomat with wide experience negotiating international peace agreements, requesting anonymity, said, "It's bloody outrageous to do this. The whole point of negotiations is to not play dirty tricks like this." Sources said that the officials linked to Trump's team contacted investigators days after Trump visited Tel Aviv a year ago. Strange timing, eh? His first foreign tour as U.S. president. Trump promised Netanyahu that Iran would never have nuclear weapons and suggested that the Iranians thought they could do what they want since negotiating the nuclear deal in 2015. A source with details of the Dirty Tricks campaign said, "The idea was that people acting for Trump would discredit those who were pivotal in selling the deal, making it easier to pull out of it." Okay, so they don't even really necessarily have to blackmail the people, but I'm curious whether it would ever come to that. By the way, yes, he did visit Tel Aviv, as they said, during his first foreign tour as U.S. president, but don't forget that his first stop was actually in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, I recommend the balance of this article to you as well, and want to use some of the closing minutes of the show to take a quick look at what Ronan Farrow had to say, just to fill us in and drop that little nugget into things over in the New Yorker. Israeli operatives who aided Harvey Weinstein collected information on former Obama administration officials. That's who Black Box is. Let's see. In June 2017, Ann Norris, the former State Department official, received an email containing an unusual proposal. Norris is married to Ben Rhodes, the former foreign policy advisor to Barack Obama and a prominent advocate of the Iran nuclear deal. This is the MO here. In the email, a woman who introduced herself as Eva Novak and claimed to work for a London-based film company called Shell Productions, that's probably a giveaway, asked Norris to consult on a movie that she described as All the President's Men meets West Wing. It would follow the personal lives of government officials in positions that determine war and peace during times of geopolitical crisis, including nuclear negotiations with a hostile nation. Recalling the exchange, Ann Norris said that she found Eva Novak's request bizarre and that she never responded. The email appears to be part of an undercover campaign by an Israeli private intelligence firm to discredit Obama officials who have been leading proponents of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. The campaign was first reported on Saturday by British newspaper The Observer. However, sources familiar with the effort and pages of documents obtained by The New Yorker reveal there's more to understand. Two of the sources told me on Sunday that the operation was carried out by Black Cube. That's the firm also employed by Harvey Weinstein, and that offers its clients access to operatives from Israel's elite military and governmental intelligence units, including the Mossad. A month before Norris received her email, Rebecca Kahl, a former program officer at the National Democratic Institute and wife of the former Obama administration policy advisor Colin Kahl, also received a puzzling email, this time from a woman named Adriana Gavrilo, and claiming to be head of a corporate social responsibility or socially responsible investment firm. That, gee whiz, just wanted to kind of sort of, for some strange reason, get to know her. And that little fishing expedition apparently didn't work either. The two names appear to be aliases. LinkedIn pages for both of them at one point showed a slim blonde woman advertised as fluent in Serbian. Shortly after the New Yorker contacted Black Cube about the story, Novak's LinkedIn page was deleted. The email addresses listed by both women don't work. Calls to the numbers listed went unanswered. The websites behind them have been taken down, but both were bare bones pages constructed through a free site building tool anyway. The addresses for both companies led to shared office spaces. There's no evidence that either company have ever operated in that space either. So rubbing your chin and figuring it out. The details just beginning to trickle out here. I'm sure we'll be talking about this all week and much, much more. And it's all just to distract you from the other scandals already piling up, which likewise should have equaled his removal from office 100 years ago. Anyway, but what do we got for those of you who are willing to stay tuned, as you should, all day long to Netroots Radio? Well, here's what Justice will be rounding up. Yes, of course, he'll be on the spy story, but what about this one? A 20-year-old black National Hockey League prospect is given a police escort after racist threats from opposing fans. You can't even go and play the sports these days. So much more, of course.
From
we'll tell you
Daily
a little bit more
Codes
about
Radio
it after this.
on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Get these stories. Actors were paid between $60 and $200 to attend New Orleans City Council meetings in support of a proposed power plant. And the California grocery chain Albertsons is sued over barring Hispanic employees from speaking Spanish on the job while on their breaks or even when assisting Spanish-speaking customers. Duh.